Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in today's webinar titled Competing and Winning Globally. Thank you for investing this hour with us and our industry leaders. Also, thanks for the questions many of you submitted when you registered. We've sent many of these questions to our global team to get their input and their insights. Some of them you'll hear from today. Should you have questions during the webinar, please type those into the questions tab on your control panel. Time permitting, we'll get to those during or at the end of the webinar. As a reminder for APMP members, this webinar does apply to your continuing education units for certification. Also, this full presentation, including the slides, will be posted on our website by tomorrow, so you can review it and share with your team. I am Mallory Price and will monitor today's webinar. We have 4 global practitioners in business winning joining us today on our panel, and combined, they have over 50 years experience in sales, global business development, capture, leadership, and proposal development. Amy McGeady joins us from Texas. Amy is Senior Vice President of Strategic Solutions at Shipley. Amy has held many proposal management positions, owned and managed her own consulting business, and led a nonprofit organization for many years. Sam Singh is Managing Director of Shipley India and partner in Shipley Limited. Sam is an industry expert of international business development, sales leadership and training, and bid and proposal best practices. Javier Casanga is with Shipley Latin America and joins us from Costa Rica. Javier has over 12 years experience in business consulting and capture and proposal management. He has served clients on engagement in dozens of countries. Brad Douglas is Executive Vice President of Shipley's Global Services. Brad will moderate today's webinar. So we have an amazing team of experts today, and I am so excited to hear what you guys have to say. So this webinar is based on input from business winning leaders and practitioners in many parts of the world. So today's agenda will address these items. First of all, we'll talk about the global economy and the outlook. Then we'll talk about global challenges and the opportunities those challenges can hold for us. We'll talk about global competitors, how to position ourselves globally. And then finally, we will summarize and have a question and answer session and hopefully get to those questions you have that we didn't get to during the presentation. So without any further ado, Brad, I will turn this presentation over to you.
Great, Mallory, thank you. And thanks for joining us, the panel, and for all of you who are joining wherever you are and setting aside some time for this important topic. Why would we choose this topic? A couple of reasons. One is many of us just returned from the Shipley Worldwide Leadership Conference in Dubai that we held last month, where the thought leaders of the various regions of the world that represent Shipley and work with Shipley clients globally got together, and we brainstormed and we talked about trends and we talked about commonalities and differences in international business development. And it was a fascinating 3 days, and part of that we want to share some of the global understanding that we came away with. The other reason is we are almost constantly asked, what's going on in industry? What are other companies doing? And what are some of the trends and nuances going on in business development? And so one of those trends is clearly global business development. And many organizations are starting to think more globally when it comes to capture proposal activities. One thing I think we all learned from the pandemic that we all experienced together worldwide, globally, is that we can do a lot more than we thought we could do virtually. And so we have been fortunate enough to have many organizations ask us to help them establish what we would call maybe global hubs, proposal centers, where we can focus activity around the world to kind of have a follow the sun model where we can support sales and enable sales globally with capture and proposal support. So It can be a time zone benefit. It can also be, there's places in the world where we can establish low cost proposal centers where there is great talent, highly educated, very talented resources that can support our capture and sales activity globally. So that's why the topic is we are seeing more and more companies want to establish this global capture proposal capability worldwide. And this slide is simply to show the Shipley global presence. This is how we've chosen to establish our organization by setting up global partners in key parts of the world. So Sam, who's with us today, not only represents Shipley India, but Shipley Europe. He's part of the senior leadership team in Shipley Limited. He's joining us from the UK today. Javier is part of Shipley Latin America in Costa Rica. And so we put out notification to our global operational centers and said, what is it people need to know? What's going on out there in the global marketplace that we could share? So the input you're going to get for the next several minutes is not from Sam and myself and Javier and Amy, but it really is from, as Mallory said, our global partners around the world. So let's start this way. The global economy. This is a massive topic. There is no way we can do this topic justice as a small part of a 1-hour webinar, but there is a lot going on. There is a lot going on in the world economic environment. Technology, conflict, politics, keep the list going. It's all impacting the global economy. And does it influence business and business development? Of course it does. These are just a few headlines. You know, you can read these every day and you're going to get all of these global headlines that you stop and think, oh, how is this going to possibly impact my business or our organization? What should we be thinking about organizationally, leadership-wise, when it comes to competing in a global environment? So these are just a few of many headlines that appear every single day. The economic situation. Again, this is a constant shift. So to say the global economic environment is this way today, 1 week from today, it might look a little different. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We're not sure what's going to happen in the next 30, 60, 90 days. But this is a snapshot, you see, from the World Economic Forum back in September. So, you know, a few months old, of where do chief economists expect the economic growth and the employment growth in 2023. These are their figures. So is there potential opportunity for us in these areas as far as hiring good talent, professional development opportunities, business development opportunities? Can we start thinking more globally, a little bit outside of our normal comfort zone in doing business? Those are some of the questions we want to address today, is what can we do or what might we be thinking about on a global scale that might impact our own business or that might bring to bear new and different competitors. We may find ourselves this year, next year, a few years from now, competing with organizations or companies or universities or whoever that we had no idea would enter our market space, because the world's borders have shrunk and now we can do so much more virtually. And so whether we decide to compete globally or not, that's a strategic decision, but we need to be aware there may be global competitors entering our markets and our space that we might not even dream about today. That's how fast things are moving and shifting and changing. So with that, I've asked Amy if she would spend a few minutes talking about the importance of, regardless of our global strategy or our goals and objectives for global work, to walk us through briefly how important it is to still maintain a solid framework and to work within a business development framework, and how important the left side, the far left of this life cycle or framework is. Amy, would you spend a few minutes on this for us, please?
Sure. Thanks so much, Brad. Yeah, when we're trying to compete globally, we have to be really, really strategic, and we have to know the market. We have to be doing the work that it takes really early in the life cycle. And to really do this successfully, when we work with global companies, we know that the most successful companies have their leadership involved in these early, parts of our process. They really are thinking through what is their investment in the short term and the long term that will be necessary to pursue this business and win. And even when we're thinking globally, we really also need to be looking through that local lens. So as we identify needs, as we define requirements, we need to be making sure that our strategy reflects a deep knowledge of and a deep respect for the local context. So as we are thinking through our global business, what are the local implications of the things that we're discussing? So thanks, Brad.
Great, Amy. And one thing, Mark Taylor, who we'll reference here later, Mark is one of the managing partners over in Shipley Limited in the UK. He stressed exactly what Amy said in his notes back to me, was the importance. If we're going to win work globally and have global contracts, we've got to have that local delivery capability, not just the ability to go compete and win, but we better think about how we're going to deliver on a local basis, as Amy said. So great, thank you. Mallory, has Javier, I know he was having some challenges logging in. Did he get in okay?
It looks like it.
Okay.
I'm here.
Awesome. Okay. Javier, I'd like you to spend a few minutes. You have such a great leadership management consultative background and experience. Would you spend a few minutes talking about the importance of alignment of our business development goals, objectives, and strategies with what's really going on in the world? Would you spend a few minutes on this for us?
Sure. I believe when companies decide to go international, sometimes there are many choices along the way of how you actually make operational those business units. Are those business units going to be something like hub and spoke? Are those going to be replicating directly your service and product strategy from your headquarters, or are they going to have some level of freedom and independence to tailor to their market? And how that tailoring happens has to do a lot with that identification of the market, that alignment between how you plan to deliver and how you do it in your home territory. And so those are some of the decisions that companies need to take into account. And you could have more independent regional presence, or more dependent, more centralized. What is important is to realize that when you go regional, there are many nuances that can be overlooked in terms of culture, in terms of the way of doing business, and in terms of what is required even from the regulation standpoint. To bring a little bit of color, I actually help. I like to share this with the audience. I actually help run a little bit of the Costa Rican operation and our overseas team down in Costa Rica. And there are so many different regulations that we need to comply, and regulations that Costa Rica, for example, has enforced before the US. And so certain disclosures that we have to do here that are not necessary in the US, for example. And so all of those nuances, you always need boots on the ground, and you always need to figure out how much independence you are going to give to your regional offices.
Great, thanks, Javier. And a little bit later, Javier, I'm going to come back to you because I want to talk a little bit more about, or I want us to talk more about some of these regional differences, including possible, and you mentioned cultural barriers, language, things like that, because I believe you worked on a whole lot of opportunities. You weren't bidding on work in Costa Rica, right? You were working opportunities across the world.
Right. And also, from here, we did a lot of nearshoring. So providing this service for the U.S. market and the North American market. But also there were many opportunities for our customer that we surprised them internally, having other language capabilities in Spanish and Portuguese. The time zone, sometimes it helps when you are in the same U.S. time zone, but we actually in Costa Rica, for example, we overlap with the three major U.S. time zones, so that helps if you want to assign a team to the Pacific time zone or to the Eastern time zone. So that helps as well. And there are other needs, for example, within Latin America, for example, Brazil, that you can also serve from here, and that is kind of like a useful middle ground regional office.
Great, good, thank you. And then we see a quote here from Mark Taylor, again, Managing Director of Shipley Limited in the UK. This was one of his comments back. He said, careful and honest analysis of the risks, investment, and potential ROI are strategic considerations when deciding to compete globally. So Javier, would you just elaborate a little bit on this graphic when it comes to risk and marketing costs and things we need to consider?
Sure. So I think when you decide to go international and regional, there are services that you end up customizing, and so that means that you increase your risk on how your delivery is not your usual way of doing business, and that inherently brings risks. And so all of those nuances, you have to be careful. How willing is your company to tailor or modify your service or your product, and how far are you willing to go? I was reading also on the topic, and there are many examples of this in the automotive industry, for example. So when you see large brands, let's say like Toyota, and Toyota coming into the US, for example, where the product has to be tailored to a different culture with bigger engines, more capacity that they were used to, they were trying to decide how much were they willing to go before completely creating entirely new products for this market. And so then that creates a risk, because then that product has the risk of being too specific to a region, and you're not going to be able to sell it anywhere else if for some reason that region has an economic downturn, has consumer behavior changes, and so then you're basically long-term invested in those decisions.
Excellent, good. Thanks for bringing that example to us. Great. Mallory, if questions arise as Javier or Amy or Sam are speaking, feel free to jump in and interrupt us with a few questions as we go. Now, these next couple of topics were really generated by Frederick Lam. He is our general manager for Shipley Nordic in Denmark. And this was the quote. He says, in international business, there are layers of potential obstacles that need to be addressed. Every potential obstacle needs to be mastered to generate sustainable international business winning success. So he talks about these layers of obstacles and some of these challenges. So just want to list here. We won't dwell on these a lot in detail for each one. But you see, he's saying international business is a multifaceted strategy. We've mentioned this already at least once or twice. Domestic know-how and presence is only half of the capability. There's a lot of other things to consider, including those that Javier talked about, costs and risk. Winning is a mix of simultaneous tangibles and intangibles. On this next screen, you're going to see what we mean by that. Success generally requires a local presence. Simply replicating previous winning formulas, like if we're in the US, trying to replicate exactly what we're doing in the US overseas may lead to a bad idea. The ability to reinvent or being innovative is paramount to success. So, and Javier, your example of Toyota coming in the US market was perfect. You know, we've got to be innovative if we're going to succeed at this and be aware of what's going on around the world. So Frederick from Shipley Nordic, he mentioned these layers of potential obstacles. And here he laid these out for us. And so you can see this outer white ring is the global rules and regulations. We've got to be aware of those. Then he mentioned local tangible business vertical traditions. So what's going on in vertical markets and vertical business in those locales, in those areas? And then there's the tangible traditions, right? And then there's intangibles, things that we don't necessarily read about or hear about, but are real when we're competing for work. You know, how exactly is the evaluation process going to work? And not just on paper, but how does it really work? Local rules and regulations, local tangible general business traditions, tangible business vertical traditions based on your market, architectural and engineering. You know, what market are we in, and what are some of those vertical traditions locally in those markets? And then we've always got to be thinking who might be local competitors that we may not know about from long distance. So these are the layers Frederick was talking about of potential obstacles that we need to at least think about, try to overcome, and especially be aware of when we're trying to compete for global international work. Now, Sam, I'd like you for the next few screens here to talk a little bit about what we've seen as far as some high potential industries. And this is hard because there is a lot of potential out there internationally. So you're going to find we list a lot, and then talk about specifically a little bit about competing in Europe. Some of you may have an interest in that, and we won't dwell on it. But you know, bidding to the Ministry of Defence, for example, in the UK is a little bit unique. So we're going to just touch on that just a little bit. Sam, will you take it from here?
Sure. So depending on which industry you're bidding in Europe, there is a lot of regulated industries. If you're bidding in the public sector, then there are different methods by which you bid. For example, you could be competitive tender, it could be competitive dialogue. Competitive dialogue is very interesting because there you're asking for a solution, not a proposal. And then, of course, there is the compliances, the international technology transfer compliances. And then in Europe, there are many regulated industries. So if you're bidding to a utilities company, wherever you are in Europe, it's regulated. Although it's many utility companies are privately held. And the same way with transportation, airports, these are regulated. I was speaking to a client just 2 months ago about the challenges they have, that from when they have a technology solution that could really, for example, improve the way airports run, for it to be in installation at the airport, the regulations get in the way and the procurement process gets in the way. So a lot of times here, what you have to have is three things. One is understand the regulations, because just failing to fill in one piece of the jigsaw in the bids could make you lose that. The second is the pre-RFP positioning and capture discipline. And the third is, increasingly, we need to think about consensus, both within our organization and also within the client organization. Who is the person in the client organization, especially if it's going to go through tender, are defending us when we're not in the room? Next.
Great.
Yeah. So you see here that there are various ways in which we could identify opportunities. There are a number of portals. The European Union itself has a portal that it issues. There are other subscription services where you could find out what the bids are. And just this morning, a colleague and I were talking about one of our clients and looking at all their recompetes coming up that even they haven't thought about. And yet in the public sector, if you're an incumbent, think that your competitors would know whenever your contracts are coming up for renewal. So being an incumbent, we mustn't lose sight of the fact that our competitors know our renewal timescale. And so we need to be ready to understand about all the compliances and global opportunities. If we're not an incumbent, it's a great way of starting to look at planning the capture and pre-RFP positioning, because we know when the contract's coming up for renewal, and that's the freedom of information availability within Europe for opportunities inside Europe.
Great point. Great point about incumbency and being aware our competitors know when that contract is coming up for renewal. And then you just want to touch on this as well?
Yeah. So there's some very specific rules apply when it's Ministry of Defense sourcing. And interestingly, with a lot of things, they want a flow down of some of the things going to small and medium-sized companies. Certainly in the UK, that's a big push, and parts of Europe, there's a big push, that there is some impact to local companies, small companies, or even regional economies. So the pipeline for what will be coming in the supply chain within defense has already been released. And so organizations who want to bid for that need to think about compliances. Now, interestingly, something unique about the typical Ministry of Defense procurement, there is a concept called government-to-government procurement. So if some technologies become so strategic that the bidding country has to give approval, or the company who's bidding and their country has got to give approval, the receiving country has to also look at that. They could take it completely out of the procurement process, and it could go through a government-to-government procurement. And that could be quite an interesting way in which to beat the competitors.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you. And again, why are we covering this? We're covering this because there are opportunities that we may not be thinking about. There are markets that we may need to start considering because of the global nature of the world we live in. All of the technology and advances and conflicts going on, there's just tremendous opportunity if we actually think about it strategically. Now, in several of your questions, those of you that put questions as you registered, these were a couple of terms that you wanted us to at least mention or clarify. And unfortunately, in an hour's time, we can't go into these in detail, but we wanted to at least, some of these kept coming up over and over again. And so you can research some of this on your own as well. But there were questions about foreign military sales. Sam, this is kind of what you explained, government to government. It's the U.S. Selling systems, weapon systems, technology, what have you, military-wise. So it's kind of government to government as far as the government's regulating. I got a screen on this here in a minute, but that's one option if you're in that market space. DCS, direct commercial sales. This is where if I'm company A, I might be able to go sell direct to Australia under certain conditions and with certain approvals and security approvals and so forth. So there's foreign military sales, which is kind of, and I'm doing air quotes, kind of government to government, quasi, and there's direct commercial sales. This would be a company selling to a government. ITAR was asked about. ITAR is an abbreviation for the International Traffic in Arms Regulations. If you all are competing or thinking about competing internationally, you need to look at becoming possibly ITAR certified, depending on the type of data, on data transfers, data storage, data protections that you're dealing with. So ITAR is a big deal in the US, and being ITAR certified if you're doing international work. And then Sam, you kind of mentioned this common term, in Europe and other places really in the world, this ITT as opposed to an RFP, invitation to tender, is a common term. So we just wanted to briefly, define some of this for you. I know this is really high level and short, but those were common terms that kept coming up in some of your questions. And this, I know this is kind of busy and it's a screenshot. So the source here is the Defense Institute of Security, Cooperation Studies. You can kind of get a feel here for how foreign military sales in the US works. Sam, you mentioned how it's, this government to government sales is different. So if another country has a need, they can identify that need and submit a letter of request to the US government. Hey, we're requesting this weapon system for our country. That letter of request is received, it's reviewed, it's approved or not. It's a very detailed process, and eventually, hopefully, there is a letter of agreement, and then the work begins, and we begin to design it and build it and test it and develop it. So it's a process. It's a complicated, sophisticated process for selling military products primarily to other governments, foreign military sales. And it's a topic in and of itself, but some of you may be considering this if that happens to be your market space. Okay, the other topic Mallory mentioned that we wanted to address a little bit, at least, is this idea of global competitors. And how do we think about competitors when it comes to international business? How can we effectively compete globally without understanding the global competitors? Well, we'll try and answer that. What competitive strategies are unique when competing globally? Those were a few of your questions that you submitted upon registration. So I've asked Amy to address this topic. And again, Mallory, if there's any questions that are coming in about competitors or other topics we've discussed, feel free to jump in. Amy, would you just, we kind of categorized 3 clumps of competitors here: known, unknown, and our nightmare competitors. Would you talk about these a little bit?
Sure. As both you and Sam have alluded to, competition and knowing the competition is absolutely critical. So starting with, are there known competitors? Using the sources of information we've shared, are there incumbents? Are there similar projects that we know other companies are working on? Who might be some unknown competitors? Are there companies that we know are potentially entering a market? Have there been some recent mergers and acquisitions that a company has gained some new capabilities that would allow them to enter our market? Or have there been joint ventures or consortia teams that are building some competition that that aren't incumbents? They're not running similar projects right now, but we think are potentially entering into this space that we want to be in. And then can we identify what we call the nightmare competitor? So this may or may not be an actual company, but it's really putting together a profile of what company could offer everything that our customer wants and expects. And if that company were to exist in our marketplace, how will we compete? So really thinking through, in an ideal case for our customer, what are the things that they really want and who can best offer that to them? And if not us, how do we become that solution for our customers? We have a quote from one of our partners in the Asia Pacific area, that even though competitive research and assessment is really difficult when you compete globally, it's absolutely necessary if you want to have a competitive advantage. And especially if we think that we might be operating from a position of weakness or of risk.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Amy. And this, what you described, really, my mind kind of went to even for domestic work. We should be doing this exact thing, right?
Definitely. Well, and we were just talking this morning that many of us know of black hats, but those are changing. And it's, again, always really important to think of the competitive landscape through the lens of the customer and what they want and who can offer them what they want.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. Sam, do you have any other comments on just competitors when it comes to international work, and any tips or ideas to share?
Sure. One of the things, picking up what Amy said about unknown competitors, could be the internal competitors. And a lot of times the winner can be No Decision Incorporated. And so internally, clients will have, or organizations will have, competing departments competing for the budget. There'll be internal politics. And so we mustn't forget the fact that there may be some internal competition for this particular initiative. And how do we prepare a value proposition or a business case that really helps consolidate our position so that No Decision Incorporated does not win? Back to you, Brad.
That is intriguing, because over the last several years, we have seen a little bit of an influx in U.S. federal government employees attending our training courses on capture management, proposal writing. And we kind of, why? Well, why are you learning how to do proposals better or be more customer? And it's that very thing you just mentioned, Sam. It's Department X of the U.S. government has to compete for workload and headcount against private sector. They don't want to outsource all these jobs to private sector. They lose their budget, they lose their control. So they have to now compete through proposals to secure their workload and their headcount. So you're exactly right. Internally, organizationally, we have to think of that our customer they're competing for that. They want sometimes to retain that work themselves. Great point. And then one of the key points that was raised by one of our international partners as we prepared for this webinar was I see this, I think, more in Europe than in the US, but this idea of a consortia and the role they play in international business. And Sam, if you don't mind, I mean, you are in the UK now and you are a partner there. Could you touch on how this might impact international business?
Oh, that's a great point. That's a great point. We're seeing increasingly competitors joining hands and pursuing either private or public sector. And that's when you look at the win probability, instead of competing with each other and having a low win probability, forming a consortia. And sometimes it is a joint venture, and the joint venture creates a legal entity. In really big cases, they can even create a financial special purpose vehicle for that project. And in the sort of simplest form, they may agree to just who would be prime and who would be sub. And I've seen cases in Europe in the public sector where they have a shifting prime. In the project stage, one company is prime, and then when it goes into the operational stage, another customer is prime. So the whole configuration of how a team of bidders are put together to come up and be forming a consortia, we're seeing increasingly that is happening. But the key lesson learned here is to be clear about roles and responsibilities and where the risk flows, because that drives who becomes prime, who becomes sub, or whether there's a legal entity needs to be formed in the form of a joint venture.
Great. Thank you for that insight. And I think we'll continue to see this, wherever we are, that teaming partners, partnerships, joint ventures, consortia will, they have to, with the advances in technology and sometimes the expectations of our customers, we just can't, like you said, we can't do it all. And I think of some of the most rewarding engagements here at Shipley that we've been involved with our clients. We've formed a teaming partnership with another organization to offer this solution. And those are rewarding. They come with their challenges, but a lot of times that's what we have to do to compete or to win. So the last topic on the agenda that Mallory mentioned is just positioning. If we maybe aren't doing international work or maybe we're dabbling in it, what can we do to position ourselves better to possibly pursue or win some of this work? And there's some nuances to competing internationally, and there's some commonalities with competing domestically. So, Sam, you do an awful lot of coaching, mentoring, training in the areas of early positioning and shaping the market or shaping opportunities. So would you mind talking for a while about the importance of these next topics, research, relationships, and positioning?
Yeah, sure. So we just want to imagine this scenario. Imagine if you're on a Saturday morning at home and somebody knocks on your door and says, I'm selling health insurance. Would we be interested in buying health insurance? Versus same scenario, Saturday morning, we're sat there having a coffee or a tea, and somebody knocks on the door and they say, we've been trying to get hold of you for a whole week. In case you're not aware, midnight tonight, your family's insurance policy, medical healthcare insurance policy runs out. I wanted to make sure you are not without cover. Hence, I've disturbed you on a Saturday morning because I couldn't get hold of you. And if we had already, not realized it, then we would appreciate that person coming and giving us that advice. So when we think of early research, it's to find what would create curiosity. Could we think of a way of giving 3 insights to a key player about either their peers or about the trends that really creates a curiosity and leave a hook to say, if you'd like to know more, please, I'll be happy to share more information. So it's important for us to research the key players, also research their relationships. One person I came across, what they do is they use the competitor's name plus the client in Google, and if there's any correlation, it comes up. I've known one organization, they even go to ancestry.com to see if they can find any traces of somebody who's on a client organization related to them or a competitor in any way. So it's important to do this. Now, also when we think about trust, we have to view trust as a bit of a bank account, that every action we take either builds trust or somebody says, they're only after the sale. Trusted advisors are not after the sale, they're there before for the outcome. And if any one of us can recall selling before the internet, the biggest value sellers gave to their customers, or BD people did, was free consulting and advice.
Yeah.
Today, customers almost have a view, prospects have a view. I'm going to buy that car, I'm going to buy that solution, I'm going to buy that technology, and we have to go there and either unpick it. So one of the things we suggest is, as BD people, we need to be a bit of a micro marketer. If we think selling is expensive, try buying. I challenge anyone who's got a BD title that they're easy to be contacted by any potential buyers out there. So let's all look at the way we engage with where our customers congregate, and to be put on LinkedIn and other places as a thought leader in order to create that credibility that we have, so people would know, we want to talk to this person because they are very much a trusted advisor.
Great.
And likewise, sorry, go ahead. Back to you, Brad.
No, I was just going to say that's great. And this notion of competing internationally, sometimes we do start from a position that's kind of unknown, to a potential customer. Our goal, as Sam is stating, is to get to where we're trusted enough to where we not only become known in the market or to that customer, but we actually we position ourselves to be favored. So Sam, thank you for that. It's so important, and especially globally. There's so many moving parts as far as political and relationships. Trust is huge. And then we took some of your questions, some of your remaining questions that were not necessarily part of a group of questions, and there's some thoughts about just global bid and proposal awareness. And I've asked Javier from Shipley Latam to just talk about these bullet points, and from his perspective, right? You're in Costa Rica, you're working on strategic pursuits and opportunities, could be anywhere. Like he said, Brazil, could be US, Canada, Europe, Asia. Would you touch on just these bullet points and how important they were in your actual work, Javier?
Yes, and for context, to let the audience know, our team in Costa Rica was handling some of the largest sales in the year for our customer that involved up to $300 million over 5 years of IT sales, just to give you an example, for another global company. And so in those, we had already established a lot of trust with our client in order to be, the last set of eyes on a proposal going out for a sale that size. And in that, even with English as a second language, that's why language is there 3 times. Even if it's a second language, we have shown our client that our team had the right capabilities to proofread, to enhance the writing, to basically provide a desktop publishing capability that was impeccable at that level. And for that, we had many we had enough checks along the process and a set methodology, so they knew that not only we had talented individuals in team, but we also had those individuals respecting a process, and that way the trust was there and was, preserved. When we were involved in those processes, we also had multiple individuals looking at the final, end product. So they also knew that we, had to double checked our work. And in those cases, how you can build that is through training and through constant innovation within the teams. Our team went for several layers of Shipley training. We also have individuals that are APNP certified, and all of that training was also hand in hand with training from the client on their own solutions. So not only does our team know and respect the methodology, but they are also very aware of the context of the solution that we are helping others to sell. So definitely that goes in hand with, the trust and the compliance for the internal processes.
Great. And one thing you've shared with me many times, Javier, is just one thing that is common wherever we're competing in the world really is compliance. We have to answer the mail, and we have to do it the right way, and we have to follow instructions. And one thing that, again, you've ingrained in me is the evaluation processes are so very different. And, those two things, we just need to be nimble. We need to be aware and smart about how we go about competing. So just in summary, as we approach the top of the hour, a couple of quick guidelines in summary. We need to strategically, organizationally, carefully evaluate the risk reward and the potential opportunities that may await us globally. Understand some of the barriers to entry. What are they? Can we overcome them? Recognize the need for local presence, not only in business development, but in the delivery. If we win the work, anticipate these regional differences. Expect them. Don't be surprised by them. Research regulations and policies. Assess the competitive landscape, as Amy so well described. Look for teaming opportunities, partnering, consortium, whatever it takes to win. And the key really is simply do your homework. So let's pause and just, Mallory, are there any questions that we've got a few minutes left? We'll go ahead and address as best we can.
Yeah, so we did receive one, and I'm going to pose this question to Sam. This is regarding the reversal of the role of the prime and sub in a consortium during proposal development and then later on during implementation. So what is the reason for reversing the role, and does the client typically accept that role reversal?
That's a great question. This has to be done part of the tender process up front, and the client has to agree to it. And the reason for the role reversal is to do with risk. Let's say, for example, there's a city in the world where in a metro railway system, ticketing systems have to be put in. So during the implementation, it is a project, and the risk is with a company that manufactures those ticketing barriers, machines, and all the equipment. But once it's installed, it needs to be operated, and that operational may or may not have a technology element. It may be just making sure there's maintenance and it's run. So the risk of that project is less. So it's often driven by the appetite of sharing the risk, either in the consortium itself or between the two partners who are bidding to agree that during the implementation phase, it's better that the manufacturer takes the risk, and during the operational phase, the operator takes the risk.
Great example. Yeah, to move from original design and implementation to actual execution, you're right. It may require the role reversal and different type of risk sharing. Great example. Well, thank you, panel. This has been fantastic. I think we've tried to represent the global perspective, not just in voice today during the webinar, but in some of the quotes and the sharing that we got back from our global partners here at Shipley. We invite you to consider other webinars that are coming up. We have one in May and then another one in June. You're certainly welcome to any of those. And again, thank you for all of your time and for the questions you submitted early on when registering. It really helps us shape the content for these webinars. So have a great rest of your day. Good luck on any of your pursuits and your activities, and hope you'll join us again for another webinar. Take care, everybody.